Welcome to the FAnews webinar sponsored by Econorisk. Professional indemnity cover is most certainly a hot topic based on the number of people who register for the session today. And yes, I know many of you are here just for the 1.5 CPD hours. If you are indeed one of them who just attends for hours, I have no doubt that you will learn something new today. Just a reminder that in order to get your 1.5 CPD hours, you need to be on the session for the whole 1.5 hours. We are quite strict with that. In terms of the admin around the CPD certificates, as soon as we have the report of the list of attendees, we will upload it on the FAnews CPD system. You'll then be able to download your own certificate from our system. So if you're not registered on FAnews, you can simply go to the login page, which is FAnews, go to the CPD button, click on Forgot Password, insert the email address you registered with for the event. You will receive a password from the system, and then you just log in with your ID number and your password, go to View Completed Questionnaires, and your certificate will be there. If you are registered on our system, you can just go to Login, go to Completed Questionnaires, and download your certificate. Please give us about 2 to 3 days. We will send out an email as soon as that is ready. And that is as simple as that. So yeah, that is how FAnews does it. Today's theme is understanding the complexities of PI cover, risk management, PI placement, and the PI renewal process. Our presenters for this session is Jame Skuse. I'm sure I haven't got that surname correct. Steve van Roretz, Michael Salant, and Andrew Lilley. I will introduce them in more detail as we go along. Thank you, Econorisk, once again for sponsoring this event. And first up is Jame Skuse from Econorisk Special Risks, who will share some insights into special risks and the advice services offered for financial services professional. Thank you, Jame.
Thank you, Renette. It's Jame Skuse, so you were close. Let me share my screen and we can kick into this. Yeah, I'll be talking about professional indemnity, and I'll start with the basics and then head to a bit more technical side of things. So apologies to the stalwarts and the veterans in the industry. But for those of you who are new to this, this should be very informative. Okay, so professional indemnity is part of a family which we call special risks, but can also be referred to as niche risks. And it's a colloquial loose term. You can see here some of the brothers and sisters and cousins of professional indemnity that you may be familiar with: directors and officers, cyber liability, trustees liability, employment practices liability, commercial crime, kidnap and ransom, warranty indemnity or M&A insurance, political risks, and general liability. It's basically financial. Yeah.
Can I please interrupt you? Can you just make your presentation full screen?
Oh, sorry. Is that full screen?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Renette. Yeah, so these are special risk, and professional indemnity is part of this family. So what is PI? PI is also referred to as professional liability insurance, civil liability insurance, and errors and omissions insurance, which can make it confusing when you first start looking at these kinds of insurance risks. What does it do? It indemnifies the insured against claims by third parties, usually a client, alleging negligence, error or omission, whilst providing professional services for a fee. And it covers legal defense costs and settlement costs. I need to Sorry, I'm just having issues seeing my screen here. Sorry, guys, give me a second, yeah. My apologies. I can't see part of my screen for some reason. Anyway, we'll just go on. PI in action, there is to give you an example of a claim, there was a claim lodged in 2013 for 1.3 billion, I think it came at 1.3 billion, 1.3 billion pounds, which is approximately 40 billion rand. And that related to the auditing of a subprime lender, which that obviously came from the financial crisis in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. So these things can be quite substantial and material, and that claim was then settled in 2015, just before its High Court hearing, and the terms of settlement remain confidential. So the operative clause in PI, what is covered? So I won't go into all the boring detail, but essentially this is from a broker PI policy. It says, we agree to indemnify you and your legal liability to pay compensation to a third party. This actually has a public liability extension, and that's why it just says third party. Usually it would actually specify for professional services, i.e. to clients. And this is another clause. The insurer will pay on behalf of any insured all damages resulting from any claims for any breach of duty of the insured. And if we further define that, a breach of duty means the actual or alleged negligent breach of duty, act, error, and misstatement, breach of confidentiality, or omission in the performance of or failure to perform professional services. So you'll see that there's a common theme here: professional services, negligence. Claim means any written demand or civil administrative proceeding that seeks damages as a result of wrongful acts covered by this policy. So what triggers the policy? You get a demand from someone, a client, saying, you stuffed up, pay us X amount. And then that you would take to your broker, who take it to the insurer, and that would initiate the claim. And that would be when the claim is made. And just a note on that, if you or your clients did receive a letter of demand, then straight away report it to the insurers, because what you don't want to happen is have what's called late notification. If you don't report within a certain amount of time, insurers can repudiate on the grounds of late notification. Who needs PI? You do, if you're a broker or advisor. It's basically any professionals. This would be architects, accountants, actuaries, auditors, engineers, legal professionals, medical professionals, financial advisors and brokers, financial institutions like banks, asset managers, and your software IT developers. Okay, why do you need PI as a broker or advisor? Because it's law. So the FAYS Act, promulgated the General Code of Conduct, and the General Code of Conduct under Section 13 says thou shalt have PI as an FSP. Then further to that, Board Notice 123 of 2009 then stipulated thou shalt have X amount of PI and also X amount of fidelity insurance. So, why do you need PI? It's a regulatory requirement, as we just saw. It's also good risk management. It's sound risk management as part of a broader risk management strategy. And it also gives your clients comfort. Remember, if you did make an error or omission, you were negligent, and this created a loss to your clients, then they would look to you through their letter of demand or civil proceedings to reclaim that loss. And your balance sheet would certainly not be the size, or your business balance sheet would not be the size of an insurer's balance sheet. So it gives comfort to your clients to know that, well, if it was pure negligence, then they know that they can lean on the insurer's balance sheet instead of yours. It also protects your reputation, your business, and your lifestyle. These claims are they're low in frequency but high in severity. So if you did have a large claim, it could literally wipe out your business, which would then obviously impact your lifestyle. In terms of the regulatory minimum requirements, you can see I've broken down the categories that you would be familiar with. Cat 1 would be your general brokers, advisors giving advice. Cat 2 would be your discretionary advisors or asset managers. And then Cat 2A is hedge fund. You'll see if you hold client funds, then there is an additional requirement according to the board notice 123 of 2009 that you would require fidelity insurance as well. The minimum limits is 1 million for Cat 1, and it's 1 million for Cat 2 that does not hold client funds. If you do hold client funds, if you're Cat 2 or Cat 2A, basically a fund manager or a hedge fund, then you would need 5 million. And this was obviously passed in 2009. So you have this classic example of a static number in regulation or through an act, which then slowly gets eroded by inflation. So, in today's purchasing power relative to 2009, the 1 million limit in 2009 is the equivalent or buys the same as about 460,000 Rand today, if you assume 5% as a inflation rate. And the 5 million would similarly be about 2.3 million. So at some point, they are going to have to raise these limits. And I don't know if it's possible, but it would make sense in regulation to have some kind of inflationary escalation built in, if that is possible. So how much PR insurance does a broker or financial advisor need? Well, the start would be the regulatory minimum. You would need 1 million, but that's just ticking a box, and it does not buy you much in the court of law. Counsel, etc., is very expensive. What you should also look at is your maximum one loss. So maybe look at what your largest client is. If you were a short-term broker, you could say, well, what is my biggest client? I've got a factory that is worth 100 million. Well, that's your potential maximum one loss. If you're a wealth manager, you could look at, well, what is my biggest client in terms of my assets under management? And that would be a good place to move to from the regulatory minimum. However, it does not take into account a systemic issue where, let's say, you had a problem in your systems or in a procedure that was replicated over and over or over a number of years. Well, then you could actually have the error or omission occurring across your entire book, and then it could potentially be higher than your maximum one loss. And it's how long is a piece of string? You don't know how much the legal costs are going to be, what the potential error is. It's not like car insurance or house insurance where you have knowledge of the value, where you can look at a Mead & McGregor or look at the value of the house and set that limit. It's essentially open-ended. So what we suggest is buy what you can afford. So the rating drivers to determine premium of professional indemnity insurance is the industry or profession, Obviously, if you had to use an analogy, if you had a dynamite factory and you had a ice making factory, the two, even if they're producing similar revenues and have similar amounts of machinery, equipment, etc., the dynamite factory is going to have higher rates. And same within professional indemnity. Certain professions are seen as or are more risky than other professions, i.e. they have worse or more severe claims history. The other rating drivers are revenue, and that I'd say once you, within the industry or profession, revenue is the primary rating driver, and then claims. If you've had claims, that's going to impact your premium and also impact the appetite out there for your risk, and also the number of staff or professionals within the business would have an impact on the premium, because the more people you have, the more you're doing, the more chance of an error or omission. So the PI actually, and most or all liability insurances, the PI in particular, follows a cycle, a market life cycle. And we can look at this if you start at a market-defining loss in the bottom right of the chart. And if we used a real-life example, that would be 2008, the global financial crisis. Suddenly, you had a whole lot of losses. We saw that example of the auditor's claim for that 40-odd billion rand. That was from the global financial crisis. And what happens then is you have reduced underwriting capacity. The insurers get hurt, they get burnt, they have to reduce their underwriting capacity, and then also reduces market competition. That then leads to increased rates, narrow coverage, and less capacity. This is what we call a hardening market. Then, however, because there's less competitors, rates are higher, insurers are actually starting to see that there's money to be made, new capacity enters the market, then there's greater market choice for the insured. That then leads to increased profits. The guys are all making money, so then they start to put more capacity. And when I say capacity, that means an insurer will say they're prepared to put, let's say, 100 million on any PR risk. They then say, okay, we're actually going to up that to 200 million for any PI risk. And then they can obviously get more premium. That then leads to increased competition, because now there's more participants in the market, and then natural economic market forces, they compete, and that leads to reduced rates, broader coverage, and lower premiums. What happens then is there's reduced profits. The guys are now starting to get squeezed, and then you start to have underwriting losses. And if we look at that in terms of the last, call it the last 16 odd years after 2008, we had the significant shock, and after the global financial crisis, and then we had the rates, they hardened, and then they slowly softened, and then it was kind of like a race to zero, certainly in the directors and officers or D&O insurance market. And as these rates came down, then we had losses coming through, and the market-defining loss would then be COVID. A lot of you would be familiar with business interruption claims linked to your infectious disease extensions on a lot of policies, and that has hammered the industry and the professional indemnity market. So important PI terms and concepts, limits of indemnity. In the annual ag, there's a whole lot here that some of you will be familiar with and others not, and it's always easier to understand things with pictures. So I like to think of it as a tower, and the tower burns from the bottom up. So you'd have your deductible or your retention basically the excess at the bottom, and your limit of indemnity would, in this case, be 10 million for the full tower, and your claims would burn up. So first, through the deductible, you would need to pay your deductible first before accessing the insurer's limit or the insurer's cover. Deductible is also called retention. You can have what's called a reinstatement. And what this does is it gives you another tower, which allows, if there's a claim that exhausts the first tower, it would then reinstate, and you would then have the ability to claim on the full 10 million again for any claim that is unrelated to the first claim or the first claim's proximate cause. So this is useful risk management tool. In practice, they aren't used that much. Any one claim on each and every limit looks like this, where essentially you have the tower replicated over and over and over, and there you can see the 8 line on its side, which is infinity. You could essentially just keep claiming forever. And this looks great, but in practice, because this coverage is very low in frequency but high in severity, it's not, I mean, I've asked underwriters here locally and in the London markets if they've seen a reinstatement used, and maybe my colleagues later can tell us whether they've seen reinstatements used, but I've only heard of 2 or 3 occurrences, and that was on, I think it was consulting engineers, all of them, where the reinstatement was used again. So I'd say reinstatement is worth it. Each and every, in reality, unlikely, highly unlikely, like black swan event type stuff to be used. This is a more complex concept, which is important to know, and that's your retroactive date and where and how a claim is made. So if you look at this, a policy was taken out, let's say in October of 2022. It then runs for a year. These policies are all short-term insurance. They all run for a year as standard. And then the policy was renewed in October or November in 23, and renewed again in 2024 in November. Then a claim was made. The insured received a letter of demand in late 2024. Then the claim was reported to insurers in early 2025. The wrongful act or the error or omission occurred way back in early 2023. So this would be covered because the claim occurred during the retroactive date and it was reported in the policy period. So this is one of the reasons why you'll often see, provided there's no gap in cover in terminology, you always want to keep your cover continuous to maintain that retroactive date. The retroactive date allows you to pick up claims that occurred before the policy that's currently in place. If we look at this next scenario, which is exactly the same, except that the wrongful act occurred before the retroactive date, that would not be covered. If we look at them together, you can see at the top would be covered, at the bottom wouldn't be covered. So critically important to stress that ensure that you don't have gaps in cover, and a retroactive date is very useful. You can sometimes buy your retroactive date backwards if you require for additional premium. So in closing, some general tips when you're placing PI. It is catastrophe cover. This is to save your business or save your client's business when something goes drastically wrong. So buy what's affordable. rather buy up and keep your deductible high, because the higher your deductible, the lower your premium. And this isn't like high frequency, say, windscreen claims where it's happening all the time. You're quite unlucky if you do actually have a professional indemnity claim. So rather have a higher deductible that you can afford, and then have a much higher limit, and avoid gaps in cover. You want to protect that retroactive date, because you don't know what happened in the past. You could have something which is festering there, which you don't know about now, and then it rears its ugly head when the tide is out, or at a later stage. And over disclose. Remember, the proposal form forms the basis of the contract of insurance for professional indemnity. Give as much information as possible. If you don't provide some material information and you do have a claim, because these are large claims, underwriters are going to go through it with a fine-tooth comb, and anything that is not disclosed could be used as grounds for repudiation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jame. Thank you for that, Jame. Quite complete as a basis to start the conversation off. I just want to make a general comment from one of our audience members. They say PI cover always feels like a minefield when it comes to annual renewal time. As IFAs, we don't receive any real guidance or advice when it comes to the PI renewal process, which is not good to hear. To establish what each benefit really means, what our respective businesses may actually require as cover, and how it could be impacted, how the claims process works. And then he says, a summarized and simplified run-through would be greatly appreciated from insurance months in advance of the renewal process. So that is just a word of advice, maybe. Next up is Steve von Roretz from Leppard and Michael Salant, legal consultant. Steve and Michael decided to co-present to delve into PI claims within the risk and regulatory framework, highlighting the limitations and sharing some claim examples around PI cover. Thank you, Steve and Michael. I most certainly look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. I'm going to start off. Good morning, everybody. Jame, nice little presentation. Many things to talk about, but unfortunately today we won't have that time to do so. What Michael and I want to go through is why claims are increasing, some of the legislative issues that are of concern. We can highlight some of those things, point to some claims, real examples from the Ombud and actual PI claims. And then we want to move to what you need to do about it and what you need to think about. So let me move forward. The next couple of slides really just highlights where claims come from. And when you start reading these slides, please have in mind your customer. Your customer is the one facing most of these exposures. They have a complex world out there. And I want to just highlight probably the one key thing on this slide. You could read the rest of them. Customer expectations have become a serious problem when it comes to a claim. They have exposures, they have an expectation, and if you are not careful as a broker, you have a massive gap between their expectation of the cover and what you've actually put in place. Now, we're going to talk about these issues later, but that gap needs managing. We need to be very clear about the services you're rendering. Otherwise, you are going to find yourself right in the middle of that gap and with a problem. They are the ones with the risk, and they sometimes believe, because of that gap in expectation, that you are almost a guarantor. Cannot put yourself in that position. This is some of the reasons. There's a second slide. Michael, which one do you want to highlight?
I think before I actually start, I just want to thank FAnews as well as Econorisk for allowing us the opportunity to deal with something that we are all clearly passionate about, that brokers are faced with on a daily basis, It threatens their business if they're not properly managing their business. So it is, in my mind, in our minds, incredibly important that you take this seriously. The issues that I'd like to highlight very, very quickly are the advisory capability and the complexity of exposures. It really also talks through to the customer expectations. You know, you might get someone who's got a range of different exposures. It might be, you know, serious contracts that you've got to look at. He's involving subcontractors. He's building something. And someone's got to navigate all the contracts, understand where the risk actually passes, what sort of insurance is required, where the insurable interest is. You know, these are things we're going to be touching on later. And is the broker sufficiently capable to deal with all these particular issues? You know, there's an expectation that brokers are the accountant, the engineer, the lawyer, and whenever anything goes wrong, fingers are going to be pointed at him.
Yeah. To move to the next slide.
Yeah, let's go on.
So you read those ones. There are also other reasons why these claims are increasing at the moment. And it is regulatory change, compliance, cyber, but I would like to highlight the corruption and crime space. We're seeing many claims against brokers in this space because I love brokers very much, by the way. So my commentary, just remember that I do love you very much. But guys, what happens in this space is the incompetence in managing businesses, your own businesses, and making sure that you have protocols in place, separation of duties, changing bank account details, sending money the wrong direction, and the cyber attacks that are so easily created these days. This is the space where I think we're seeing more claims where money is disappearing in the wrong directions, and we're not applying proper business rules to manage these claims, these exposures. That's the one I would like to highlight. Michael, do you particularly want to highlight something?
You know, we'll talk about compliance regulatory change, but I think also what is really interesting to understand is the environment in which we're currently operating. Tough economy out there. People are losing all the time. Ease of access to the FA's Ombud, it's free. They're going to take chances, and we're going to see that a little bit later. But if you focus on your compliance all the time, you know, it is part of the risk management protocols that you will be actually implementing. And this is where our focus is on risk managing, understanding the exposure and managing that risk. And that goes to the compliance issue.
Okay, so let's move on to where does your legal responsibility, where does it arise from? Jamie did touch on a little bit of this. This is now the legislative framework. We start with FA's. FA's regulates everything we as FSPs are supposed to do, conduct. I highlight at the bottom there the code of conduct. And the specific thing is the clients being rendered financial services will be able to make informed decisions. They need to know what's going on. They need to be able to decide how to progress. Now, this is where a lot of people do fall over and fail. The legislation is clear, but the lack of needs analysis, record of advice in the context of a PI claim, we're seeing it all over the place. Files are just higgledy-piggledy, not in even a chronological order sometimes. The basic rule here is doing things absolutely perfectly and in good order to comply with this code of conduct. I would mention here, and I do have a bias, when you look at something like the Financial Intermediary Association, the FIA, they have a lot of members and they have standards. They have their own code of conduct. And it's very worthwhile joining that if you're not already an FIA member. I'm going to move on to the next slide, also legislation where Mike will talk about the general code.
Yeah, we mentioned this, and it comes out a lot in the Ombud rulings as well, because this is the basic framework within which the brokers operate. And it covers the life, the investments, the non-life brokers, life brokers, etc. So let's go through it. I mean, you'll pick up on honesty, fairness, so we're looking at skill, honesty, fairness, care, and diligence. And then it goes across and says, in the interest of both clients and integrity of the financial industry. So that's as a whole. So these particular, you could go to each and every adjective here and say, well, they're actually not adjectives, they are verbs. So, excuse me. But the honesty, the fairness, the due care, etc., these should be the culture that the company has. How we actually operate, put that down and say, whenever we're conducting ourselves, we have a culture within our company that we comply with all these particular issues. And I believe, and Steve and I have been discussing this before, that I really feel that there should be courses on ethics and integrity within the industry, because it's sometimes difficult to navigate. When should I be telling the insurance company about something that I know? And when should I just shut up because I'm the agent of the broker? But that's for another discussion. Thanks, Steve.
Moving on to the last slide, you can read this for yourself. Only for me to highlight what Mike has just said, I want to emphasize. The culture of a business is so important. We have TCF, and I know that talking to many senior people in the industry in the past, they said, of course we're fair to our customers, but are you really fair to customers? Are you really, really fair? When you think about the bias of placing a piece of business, let's be controversial for a moment, for example, through a binder. Is that fair to a customer? Are you doing the right thing? Big question. Ethics and culture mean something. And I 100% agree with Michael. Ethical training, ethics is important. At the Salma conference, I happened to wear a Chairman of Salma hat on. And in July the 5th, we have a Salma conference to which you are all going to be invited. We're going to have a session on ethics. And it's a strange thing. Why do you need training on ethics? Everybody says, I know what ethics, I act ethically. Well, I'm telling you that sometimes a little bit of gray hair and lecturing here, we don't sometimes. We have to think about ethics and get trained on it. Now we go to some exciting stuff. So we're going to share, Michael's going to share some real life issues regarding Ombud rulings and certain claims. You tell me when you want to move forward.
Okay, we can actually go forward. I am going to, if anyone ever goes to the determinations that the Ombud has actually ruled on, I think it's quite worthwhile to understand this. Initially, I was going to deal with a few claims, but it's so difficult to really get to each and every one, the complexities, the essence. But what will come through all the time is that same mistakes are made. FA's Ombud looks at all claims with the same hat on. The FA's Ombud, from one aspect, is doing the industry enormous benefits. But there is the flip side that I think some of the rulings are based more on fairness to the consumer, who is the insured, rather than to the broker. And we'll go through these claims. And I think this first one really spells that out. So here, a broker, well, firstly, the insurer rejects a claim for a stolen vehicle. Why? Because it had no satellite early warning device. Complainant, after having had this claim rejected, approaches the FA's Ombud. And this claim actually occurred in 2018, but was only really ruled on a few years later. So the client actually says, well, I didn't really know about my duty to put in this system. The respondent broker says, hey, wait, guys, I sent you a policy schedule. We sent you a general letter. We said where you require them, you've got to put them in. So, the respondent testified not testified, but put in their statement that the guy knew about it. I gave him all the information. There wasn't actually any written evidence to the effect that the client knew. Now, this is notwithstanding that if you go through the actual ruling, the respondent said that when the claim was initially put in, the client actually admitted that he didn't have this satellite warning, he didn't have this tracking system, and he felt that it was going to be rejected. And I think when you actually look at the ruling there, it sounded quite clear that the broker believed that the client knew what was happening, but yet, as we'll see, the Ombud ruled against them. Why? They raised this particular section. You've got to actually notify your client of any special terms, conditions, and what the consequences are of them not being implemented. And that's the important thing. Was it in writing? Did you say specifically to this client, you need this particular warning, and did you advise them in writing? Ruling against the respondent was made, and the respondent had to pay in full the amount.
Yeah.
Any comment on that?
Yeah, we have faced the Ombud rulings many times because we do a lot of PI for brokers. One recent one to amplify this particular point is that the Ombud effectively was saying, even though an insured person has the same policy, same wording, year on year, these things have to be highlighted every year. And it wasn't. And in the context of the policy then in force, the Ombud said, broker, you're liable. You should have communicated this year on year on year. It's not good enough to do it once, which was a bit of a surprise to us and is concerning.
Yeah, to me, very concerning, because sometimes one has got to look at the legalities of it. Is there a cause and effect? In other words, did the client know, or was it only due to the fact that a particular regulatory requirement was not properly adhered to?
Yeah.
And we've got to differentiate the two. But let's move on to the next.
Let's move to the claims, where we've got profile of general reasons.
Yeah, these are, I'm throwing just a few general reasons. These are repeated and repeated over and over. The no insurable interest. You know, contracts are drawn, you get insurance, the insured takes out the insurance and puts in a claim, but then you start looking at the contracts and you say, well, no risk was actually transferred to you. We know that you've been paying your premium, but there is no actual risk transferred to you. He then turns to the broker and says, hey, guy, you didn't tell me about this. You know, sometimes you've got to be very, very careful, understand what the contracts actually say and who can and can't be insured. The warranty is not effectively disclosed. Probably this, in terms of phase Ombud complaints, is the one that comes out all the time. You know, there's a warranty to put in a tracker, huge. Warranty to put in an alarm system, comes up all the time. You know, did you tell me about the fact that the laptops have to be in a locked part of your car and not visible to passers all the time? Time bar, when we talk about the time bar, and I do know that there are a few non-life life brokers who might not be as familiar with these terms as others. There is a time bar which says that if a claim is rejected and you do not actually take action within a specified period, it could be 3 months, it could be 6 months, you lose your right to claim at all. And the brokers don't advise the clients accordingly. Inadequate, incorrect advice, I mean, it happens all the time. Insufficient understanding of the policy. And here I'm talking about the broker himself. Now, you can't sell something when you yourself don't understand the policy. We do it all the time, and it is mentioned that it's a minefield. The profession is a minefield. you need to know a huge amount, and there are tremendous obligations on you all the time. No records of advice. You know,
This is the asked of this space. The no records of advice is, putting this is the record of advice on the top of each email is not a record of advice. It needs to be explicit, needs to confirm the advice properly. And this is a space where we find a lot of problems and becomes indefensible when a claim is made against you. Almost impossible to deal with.
yeah.
Bearing in mind we've only got 10 minutes ago, 15 to go. Can we move on to some claims?
Yeah, let's go through them we'll go through it as quickly as possible.
We've got 4 claim examples. We'll try to get through all.
Yeah. All right. The first one, and I have been sort of consulting to lots of adjusters on business interruption as well. My experience tells me that it is so difficult for people to fully understand the complexities behind business interruption that I think a lot more training is required. In this particular one, I'll take you through very, very quickly. Business interruption cover arranged. The indemnity period is 6 months. The client gives 6 months gross profit figure as the sum insured. The broker himself doesn't understand that you have to give 12 months, notwithstanding you're only giving 6 months. Disaster happens, and we find out that he was grossly underinsured. He didn't go through projections, and because the claim occurred at the end of the period of insurance, the loss occurred with turnover and gross profits that were yet to be earned. This wasn't considered. It was a massive, massive claim. Here is a 27 million rand claim. Very, very fortunately, they didn't go against the brokers initially. They thought it was the insurance fault. Goes right into the court case situation. During the court case and during cross-examination, they found that it was the broker's fault and not the insurance company, yet the claim against the broker had prescribed. So it was a bit of a lucky one.
Okay.
Let's move to the next one. Here, this is another situation. These are liability policies. Really, do we understand the liability policy? Products liability, to what extent the cover applies, and what you believe it applies. And there is often confusion between products guarantee and products liability. So the clients themselves explained to when I say the client of the broker explained what they require. The broker then said, no, we've got the right cover for you. The guy put it in writing, said, if this happens, that I have screwed up and the guys asked me to redo the damage that I've already done, to repair it. Will I be covered? Broker says, absolutely. Claim happens, claim rejected. Broker's obviously liable. They gave the incorrect advice here. Should have been products guarantee, wasn't. I am going through these very quickly, and quite often, because I'm skirting through, hopefully people are getting a little bit of an essence as to where the problems are, not understanding, etc. But here was a premium claim saving exercise. New broker comes in and says, Mr. Client, because it was a Mr., he was a male, we can save you a fortune here. A lot of your heavy plants, movable plants, big trucks, are not leaving the site. Let's move from a traditional fleet onto a plant all-risk basis. The guy says, cool, a lot of money was actually saved. But what the broker didn't do sufficiently is advise the client that if any of these heavy moving trucks goes onto the road, they didn't have any cover for that. So what happens on the road, big claim, third party and own damage, no cover, because it wasn't a motor policy. Brokers helpline. Okay.
We've got 10 minutes. So
10 minutes. Okay, quickly.
These slides will be shared with you. Quite happy with that. So we'll miss the next example and move on to managing your risks. So this is crucial. This is probably our core message to you all, that when you face and manage, when you face your customers, manage your business, the critical thing is risk management. You're hearing it all the time. And I would like to highlight one particular area, and that is investment in capacity, skills, and training. Capacity is your systems, remember, not just individuals. This, to me, is probably the absolute key component of managing a risk. If you've got people that are not competent, not able to do the job, not having been trained properly, I'm going to guarantee you that you will have a PI claim against you. And a PI claim against you affects a number of things. That is your reputation, your ability to continue with the customer, and numerous things. The other part I'd like to highlight is compliance becomes part of your DNA. Everybody finds compliance a pain in the backside, and I know that the CEO of FIA, if she happens to be listening, will probably have a dip at me, but compliance should not be the worst thing in the world. Compliance is simply a metric, a number of items that really talks to the quality of your business, how you operate your business. So it needs to become part of your DNA. Stop fighting compliance, rather embrace it.
Absolutely agreed. And I think you've added here, limit your liability contractually.
Yeah, we'll go into a little bit more of that now. We have a few more minutes. This slide really is somebody who's been around the block a bit speaking to you, and you'll see the heading quite bluntly is saying, FSPs, you are at risk. We've gone through the environment you faced. You've gone through the legislation. You've seen a few claims. But please now think, this is now protecting your position. Think about your customer and how risky is that customer? How complex is their business? That represents a risk to you. And I would even go so far as saying, take a table from A to E, the best risks of A and down to an E, the high complex risks. And there are very complex risks. Make sure you understand that riskiness. It's all very well getting a nice commission or a fee. Hopefully the fee is higher than the commission you've transparently told that to your customer. But the higher the risk your customer faces, the higher risk you face. Spell out your duties in great detail, spelling out the scope of what you're going to do and your responsibilities between you and your customer. That's about contracts. Confirm disclosure duties of your customer and what they are responsible for. It's surprising how often the customer is not aware of their disclosure duties and the detail that has to be provided. They are the expert in their business. You're not. You're listening to them and you're providing a solution to what they're telling you is what their risks and what their concerns are. Never take on anything you don't have the skill or capacity to do. Oh, I missed one out. Confirm what you won't do. And I've put a big won't in red letters. I think that's quite important. You're telling the customer, this is what I'm going to do, but I'm actually going to tell you what I'm not going to do. Therefore, he understands very clearly what you are not going to accept liability for. The transparency and honesty is about ethics once again. And when you think about risk that your business faces, imagine what can go wrong and what your liability exposure could be. Just on this, I think often people don't go through a process, no matter how small or big your brokerage is. Go through it a couple times a year, deliberately sitting down and consider what risks you face. And those risks include succession. What happens if there's a fire? What happens if there's a downtime? What happens if you lose your records? What happens if you lose a customer? That's a big one, and they represent 30% of your business. That is how you become sustainable from a business point of view. Do you want to add anything there?
You know, it's really a case of just managing the risk. And we could talk forever, but we're running out of time, so let's move on.
So if we leave you with one thing, and this is, I don't know how many of you heard me talk about this before, but maybe you have, the limitation of liability. We've now got to represent ourselves as the insurance broker and intermediaries as professionals. Other professions limit their liability. You go and talk to an accountant, and that accountant will limit his liability in relation to services he renders. The legal profession tries to do it now. Certainly the engineering profession does it. You go online and go into one of your investment intermediaries, they limit their liability down to 0. They won't accept liability, but for gross negligence, recklessness. This is something that I think now really has to become an absolute minimum in the industry. You enter into proper contracts with your customers, you tell them what you're going to be doing, and you limit your liability. There are some people that don't think that's right. I disagree with them 100%. Jame mentioned, he went through a number of criteria about levels of cover. The regulator hasn't got a clue what they're talking about, and it says 1 million and 5 million. It's incompetent on the part of the FSP, part of the regulators. I think the minimum these days, even if you're a small practice with R1 million of the revenue, should be 5 million rand, absolute minimum, and that depends on the complexity and how complex your customer is. Yeah. Upwards of 10 makes sense to me. I was online the other day and I mentioned the same thing. We then got several calls here, I think 4 or 5 calls saying, please can I increase my limit? The limit saves your bacon. So afford what you can afford. Jamie mentioned that, but it is critically important you combine this to protect your business. Just as an aside, it's a subject on its own, binders and outsource agreements. We're now seeing claims being made by insurers against brokers. It is now contractual. It talks about breach of duty of care owed to each other. And if you breach that duty of care, the insurer is facing regulatory sanctions, and they are starting to hold brokers liable. I think we have to stop that dead. Brokers need to enter into these agreements with a limitation of liability as between the insurer and the broker. The insurer is not entering these binder and outsource agreements gratuitously. They do it for their own purpose. They must stay at risk unless you are dishonest, act completely recklessly, or deliberately do something that you know is wrong. The guarantor, we're starting to see brokers, if you act as if you know everything, be extremely careful, because you will then become a guarantor, and your PI cover does not provide that cover. We then move to a few pointers.
Yeah. On these particular issues, these are things that we see all the time. And my advice to every broker is prepare as if each and every case will ultimately land up in court. Because when it comes to courts, everything is disclosed in terms of a process called discovery. What emails have I sent internally? What emails have I sent externally? What will and what won't affect this particular matter? So I've seen various situations. It starts with comply with the policy terms and conditions. That could be late notification. That could be anything relating to the particular policy. Understand the policy, comply with it, don't admit liability, etc., etc. There are things that you don't want to put in, and these are things that I've seen. I haven't made them up. You know, someone sending an email to someone, this is a total cop-out, or, you know, to the client or to a claims person, I think we're actually liable here because of this, that, and the other. And I can't believe that Mr. X, Mr. X makes a lot of mistakes. You'll notice that Mrs. X is not included. She's absolutely perfect. I'm very sorry that we made a mistake, and you'll be compensated in full. This particular story was put in writing to a client by a director of a company, and he believed honestly there was a mistake that was made, and that the claim itself, as he projected it, would only be a couple of $100,000 that they could afford to pay themselves if the PI wouldn't pay. In the first instance, the PI would, and it didn't happen. Do not put that in writing. It's going to prejudice you. You're going to be contractually liable. Let's move to the next.
Okay, this is our last slide, and there's a little bit of fun on our part. I've used this slide before, but just to make the point regarding limitations of liability, I beg your pardon, there's one more slide in between. Why do you manage risk? It clearly enhances reputation. It's about your business growth. It's about sustainability. You built up a business. Now you destroy it because your limit of indemnity is too low, or you have not trained people, or you have not applied your mind to the complexity of the customer's risk. It builds on trust. That means more business. You remain competitive. And the very last slide, this is the one. It's a little bit of fun. I'll read it out loud, but you can all read it. Nothing we have said today should be construed as advice. If you choose to use anything we have said, you do so at your own volition and risk. In the event you incur any loss or damage arising out of anything we have said,
Yep.
100%. We do not accept any liability for such loss or damage. And if you use anything we have said today, you agree to hold us harmless. In fact, I should be adding, and indemnify us against any claim you damage, or any damage you incur. With that, we thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed that co-presenting style. Thank you, guys. That was really interesting. I think the examples is so important that we can learn from other people's mistakes. I have a few questions before we go over to Andrew. And one comment I would really like to make is that it is clear that there is a need for some training around this. Someone asked, is there a place or company that can train our staff on these things? Another question was, where can we get a guide or a document to assist us to go through a needs analysis? Are you guys typically available when someone really knows he's going to a really difficult client or complicated underwriting story? Is there normally assistance from the provider side?
Yeah, Renette, I'm sure Michael will have something to say while you cough in the background. Oopsie daisy. From my point of view, I have to record the fact that as an underwriting business and writing PI business, we are very keen to make sure people understand what's going out there. We are developing a matrix of questions that you can do and complete for yourselves if you're an insured of ours. But I think the key, we're not allowed to talk. I'm not allowed to talk to the customer directly, so you have to go through a broker. But I would make sure, to begin with, you use a broker that really understands what they're doing. I'm not going to say any names because, of course, Econorisk is here, but there are numerous brokers that have high speciality in this space, and you need that proper advice. Brokers think, we can place our own PI cover because we know everything. You don't. I promise you, you don't. You need to have a properly employed, a high professional broker that deals with PI for brokers specifically. And I think if you do that, the guidance that you're talking about, you definitely get. Certainly a couple of brokers out there have a platform that will help you training. But it's a good thought. Maybe we should have more of an industry issue. I know that the FIA, and I am punting the FIA, they're making a lot of effort in this space. So I see the FIA as a bit of a stakeholder here. They are a gatekeeper. And to me, that is probably the only body that can drive a lot of this.
The way that I also look at it is, you can utilize other brokers in areas of expertise where you you come across as a consortium, maybe a joint venture, whatever, where you're combining expertise as well. You know, as a broker, you've got to make sure that there's no conflict of interest. It's all based on trust as well. A lot of people see themselves operating in isolation, specifically the small brokers. You can actually collaborate with other brokers with expertise in different fields. It comes to the training on professional indemnity, on risk management, on expertise that is required where it is needed. Utilize other resources. Don't operate alone.
Yeah, you probably do need to develop a specific module through the likes of the FIA. IIG is another one where those modules specific to how do you operate as an insurance broker, or what is the stuff that's affecting you from a legislative point of view, what are your exposures, how do you manage those exposures, and ignore the fact you've got PI. PI is the thing at the end when all things go wrong, where we step in and help protect your reputation.
And thank you, Steve and Michael. One last question before we move over to Andrew. Do you see, one of the questions that came in, do you see there being a further increase in claims when COFI arrives?
When it arrives. COFI, I think, is going to throw quite a few balls up in the air. I'm not sure how everybody's going to register, but COFI ultimately is bringing together a lot of the stuff we've already been dealing with. But the licensing is going to be critical as to what you're licensed to do. And I think there's going to be a lot more focus on that. We've had claims in the past where the guy is actually, with respect to life brokers out there, he had the ability to, the Cat 1 category as well, but he then places a policy on a warehouse, but he didn't really know much about Sandria. I mean, how the hell does that happen? So that comes back to some comments we both made. Don't do stuff that you're not technically competent to do. So coping things, I think, could complicate it, but the broker space is a difficult one from the PI point of view, and is starting to become a problem.
Thank you, Michael, for that, Steve, I mean. Last up, Andrew Lilley from Econorisk. He will touch on the PI renewal process and the typical market challenges they have picked up. Thank you, Andrew.
Morning, everybody. I don't know if you can see my screen properly.
No, not yet. We can see it now. Thank you, Andrew.
Okay, perfectly. Morning, everybody. My name is Andrew. I'm from Econorisk. Excuse my croaky voice this morning. The flu that's going around seems to have caught up with me. So if I'm a little bit croaky, I apologize. Coming in on the back end of the three gents that have already presented, I got asked just to maybe go through a couple of the practical insights from our own experience going through the PR renewal process and the learnings that we've had along the way over the last couple of years. Given the topic and given the broad discussions which have already happened, there may be some overlap in some of the detail of the content, but I think it's all relevant in any event, even when considering the renewal process. So if you look at there are many businesses that require professional indemnity. Jame touched on a number of the different businesses, and as mentioned in South Africa, for some of these businesses, it is a regulatory requirement. For ourselves, in terms of the FANEUS Act, 2002, there is a minimum requirement, be it R1 million or 5 million rand, depending on the category of advisor that you might be. Besides a regulatory requirement, I think the PR plays a critical role in safeguarding not only ourselves as brokers, but also safeguarding our third-party clients, where an oversight, an error, incorrect advice, which may happen, might have a devastating financial effect, both on ourselves or as well as our clients. Even if you've acted in full accordance with the regulations, discharge your duties as a broker, a claim might be lodged against you. You might still find yourself in a position where you need to defend yourself against a large claim, and often these claims run into hundreds of thousands of rands, and they extend over periods of time, which is very stressful on yourself as an individual and perhaps on your business as well. And these can run over a number of years and can be very, very distracting. So I think anyone who's been involved in this space or gone through a renewal over the last couple of years can attest that the landscape has changed. The markets, we've seen a narrowing of the markets. There's some players which have exited the PR space completely. There's some guys who have exited the primary layers. Since 2021, there's been some significant increases in rates. The expectations in terms of deductibles payable by brokers have gone up. Of late, we've seen the introduction of policy risk managed requirements regarding the giving advice, the recording of the advice, how it's kept. We've seen all of that stuff creeping in. And how this collectively, these now affect the rates we're able to negotiate for our PR Insurance Act renewal. So I think critical when renewing your policy or when placing a new policy, that the person placing the policy needs to have an overarching understanding of the business. And yes, there might be there are heads of different business units who complete the proposal or provide you with the information. But the person doing the renewal should have a good appreciation of the business activities, the classes of business that you're writing, the revenue projections, the number of your staff, any potential claims or notifications which have happened in the past, and any changes in operations or risk management practices. And that Steve and Mike alluded to that your operation changes, your risk management practices changes. So the person submitting the renewal needs to make sure that they've got a clear understanding of what is actually going on in the business. So the advice we have to give is start early. Give yourself enough time to get all the information that you need. Make sure that it's accurate, the proposal is completed in full, and that all the details are adequately answered. So if you look at the proposal form, and this is really the nuts and bolts of the process, be it whether you insert a new PR policy or whether you're doing a renewal. The proposal form, over time, we've seen an increase in complexity. They're getting longer with more and more complex questions being asked. This is specifically true if you're an outsourcer or binder broker. We've seen questions, as an example, such as, do you keep all record of communications to your customer about identifying and confirming uninsured risks and the reasons for not insuring them? Do you record in writing any renewal discussions? Do you do a needs analysis and a record of advice? So all of these questions are probing, the yes or no answers, and you can take your time and answer them carefully, or you can flip through them. We'll get later on in the presentation. We'll deal with where this might have an implication of you further down the line. Binder and outsourced brokers, we see now with proposal forms, not necessarily a new thing in the recent history, but detailed questions around your agreements, around your limits, your mandates, the functions that you perform. So if you're the person completing the proposal, make sure that you're well informed. Make sure that you've spoken to the person if you're not the person who signed the contracts, make sure that you understand the mandates and the functionalities that are either prohibited or allowed within those binder functions, as well as the limits and what you are or aren't allowed to accept. If you think about this, and Michael and Steve alluded to it, it all makes sense if you hear what they had to say. In the correct, if you look at it, all ties back to the General Code of Conduct, which imposes now general and specific duties on representatives of an FSP. So it's generally here where PR claims are going to originate from. They do allude to records of advice, needs analysis, incorrect advice. It all stems part on your communication and how you interact with your client. And a lot of those questions are now finding themselves onto the proposal forms. Then begs the question, and it was discussed for a fair amount in some of the earlier presentations, is that how much cover is enough? What should it be? So I think importantly, PR cover is not a tick box exercise to satisfy a regulatory requirement. It needs to be a well thought out tool of a broker's risk management strategy. Assess your risk exposure. Can be operational, can be procedural. Look at the nature and size of the risks that you're writing. Obviously, the more complex the risks and the bigger the sums insured, it obviously talks to a higher requirement in terms of a higher PR limit. It's almost, if you look at the benefit of a higher PR limit, it means you have obviously more financial protection against the claims which might arise from any errors or omissions. And in the event that a significant claims occur, and we've seen a couple of significant claims, in the event that a significant claims occur, it gives you the comfort that your legal costs are covered. If there are any third-party settlements or damages awarded, that those are covered, and that your own personal resources, be that of your business or your son, aren't depleted. And it also, it might be ensure that your business actually continues to operate and it doesn't have to shut its doors. I appreciate it, and Steve did also mention it, that it's impossible to cover all your risk. It really is. You cannot write to the limits that you will be exposed to, but there is a duty to make sure that you get the balance right. Don't just look to ensure the minimum. Look to see what are you exposed at. Have you limited your liability perhaps, and what can you reasonably afford? And I think both Jamie and the two gents alluded to buy what you can afford. So earlier on I mentioned the proposal form and how we've seen a change in complexity of the proposal form. Make sure that you take the time to read through your policy wording and fully understand the clauses and how they're applied. There's different wordings. Whilst PR cover is a general concept which I think everybody understands and the reason that we have it, but there are a number of different wordings across different carriers. And whilst they're largely the same, there are certain nuances from carrier to carrier. Even individual carriers might have multiple wordings within the same class, which they might apply to depending on the type and the size and the function that a particular broker performs. Often we renew as is, and we see it often, not only in the PR space, but both in the commercial and personal line space, when guys say, okay, well, renew as is. So whilst you're renewing as is in terms of sums insured and deductibles, and we're just trying to see what our annual increase is going to be in premium, don't assume that a prior wording which is applied remains the same wording which is going to be applied. Renew as is in terms of limits and costs does not imply that the wording remains the same. We've seen wordings which are largely remain the same. However, there are updates, the additional clauses included, there's additional exclusions included, and make sure that you go through the wording in detail. It's a very big point that I want to highlight. I know wordings are long, they're very boring, and often you get halfway through and you go, I know it. Don't make that mistake. Take the time to read the wording and apply the wording to your business, because obviously each business's functions and operational procedures differ from one to another. But make sure that you understand the application of your particular wording to your business. If it doesn't suit your business, consider that you may need to look at an alternative carrier who has a wording that's perhaps more suitable to you, which might have different exclusions or different limits of cover which they give you. Going back to the proposal and why I mentioned it earlier on, Steve also did allude to it, that there are references to risk management procedures within your business, which have now found themselves into the wordings. So all the questions you were answering in your proposal form, where you were saying yes or no, and you might have been skipping through them at the time of the loss, if those requirements haven't been met, or if you haven't adhered to the risk management practices which you said you might have. There are some wordings out there which then have a double deductible, which is a nasty little surprise to get at the time of the claim, particularly if you've opted for a higher deductible. If you're expecting, okay, I've got a claim, it's not too bad, and suddenly 500,000 rand deductible becomes R1 million deductible, it can be really an unpleasant surprise at the time of a loss. For binders and outsource brokers, be clear on your contractual requirements. Again, this was alluded to earlier on. There are supplementary proposal forms that are there. Talks to specifically what your mandates are, what the functions you can perform, what you can accept, what you can't accept, the different capacity of risks, the functions that you are or aren't allowed to perform. If you look at some of the wordings now that are out there, they've taken that and included in the wordings to say, be clear on your contractual requirements between yourselves and your insurers. Make sure that those agreements are signed and in place prior to any event. We often find that we get agreements which are sent through to us. They sit in our inbox. We read through them. We don't sign them. They're not returned. Might not be signed by both parties. If a loss occurs in the interim, you may find yourself in hot water. So if you are a binder and outsource broker, at the time of renewal, go through the process of internal due diligence to say, what are the agreements I have with my insurers? What are the functions that I have agreed? And then transpose that over your renewal requirements. If you look at the wordings in the space, they're offering requirements around not only that the contracts need to be signed, but that you need to be able to demonstrate that you've communicated this to all the staff within your organization that are performing the functions. Again, maybe it just seems like a point which might be relevant. But at renewal, you need to make sure that, have we hired new staff? Are there guys that are performing new functions? Are there guys that might not necessarily be trained? They haven't done the specific classes of business training. It all becomes relevant at the time of a loss. And the only time that we really go to the detail and check the wording is if there is a loss. So the point being made, Jay, is you not only need to make sure that you're reviewing your limits and the extensions, but make sure that you're reviewing the wording and how they apply to your business. Basic takeaways. PR, we know it's a necessity. As far as possible, make sure you have adequate cover for your risk exposure. When completing your proposal, make sure they're fully and accurately completed, and review your wordings and understand your covers. In conclusion, we've seen a number of questions where it's been raised to say that PR renewal is a minefield, and at the time, this time every year, it becomes a stressful exercise. I don't have any doubt that PR is a business critical tool. We need to have it, number one, from a requirement perspective, but also we need to have it and ensure that it's adequate from a business perspective. Make use of a specialist broker. Mike and Steve alluded to collaboration or using a broker out there. We have seen underwriters at the moment saying that brokers cannot they no longer place their own PR cover on their own behalf. It's an opportunity then to seek out a specialist broker who understands the space. They have knowledge and advice that can give you the proper advice how to navigate the PR landscape. It is complex. It's not as simple as it might seem. And for those small independent brokers that are struggling to place cover, they can't get the limits they require, there are also alternative solutions out there. There's a number of solutions, not dissimilar to the Econorisk broker partner model, where you perhaps operate under a banner where you get the comfort of knowing that you have the adequate cover, you have the adequate expertise, it's placed on an annual basis, and it doesn't become a stress point in your life, and that the limits are adequate, and that you don't have to worry about it. I don't think that there's necessarily anything new that I might have mentioned, but if all that my 5 minutes has done is make you think about one or two aspects here and make you revisit the process, reread your proposal form, understand your policy wording. If I managed to just get you to think of one of those things, then I think at least the presentation has been beneficial. So thank you everybody for your time.
Thank you, Andrew. That was very insightful. I think your voice has done its duty for today. You're probably not going to speak for the rest of today. So thank you for pressing through with your voice. There's quite a few comments that I would like to make, but our time is nearly up. And I think the bottom line is, one thing is you mentioned start early. What is early? And I link that to someone asking, is there a way to simplify the PI renewal process, Andrew? And I from what I've seen and from what I've heard, link it to renew as is. It shouldn't be something that should be simplified or too easy, because it's actually quite a complicated thing, and we should really tap into the knowledge of the people who know. But what is early, Andrew, when you say someone must start early?
I suppose it will depend on the complexity or the structure of your business. But early is not 6 weeks in advance. Early is because you need to get financial information. You might need to get a whole bunch of other requirements from different departments in the business. So I think for me is give yourself enough time to complete the proposal form properly, have the discussion. We make use of a broker. Have the discussion with your broker, go through the covers, get the pricing options, discuss your limits of indemnity, discuss any changes which might or might not happen in your business. And those discussions don't happen in a day or two. Often underwriters take time to digest the information which you've sent through to them. I mentioned the renewers is, you may choose to approach different markets, and then you're waiting for multiple people to give you options back. So I would say at least an absolute minimum. We start at least 3 to 4 months prior to the renewal, but I would say at least an absolute minimum of 2 months prior to the renewal.
Thank you. Jame, you mentioned obviously a variety of people in the variety of industries who needs PI cover. Is there a specific industry that stands out in terms of claims?
Sure, and it's I guess because it's front of mind, but the broker industry actually does stand out, as well as engineers or the built environment.
Yeah, we've just seen.
I think Steve could add to that in terms of his experience, what he's seen.
Steve?
Yeah, regrettably, our most complex book is the insurance broker space, insurance intermediary. And as time has gone on, it's got more difficult, reflecting the complexities that you've got in the underlying customer, because his risk is getting more complex. I see that in reference back to that question about, I think it was from Hassan. This is not a simple process. Every business changes every year. So you've got to understand and consider that. And I think he also asked the question, can we put 4 different businesses together under one policy? No, you can't. Simple as that. No, you can't. Imagine the situation where you've got one limit, I blow the limit, and the other 3 are now uninsured. I mean, that's the very basic part of it.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. 1 minute to respond as to why short-term brokers having so many claims as well. If you look at claims on a daily basis, there are thousands and thousands that are happening in any event. When those claims get rejected, someone's looking for someone to pay them as well. So if the insurance company doesn't pay, the fingers are pointed directly at the broker all the time. Ease of access again to the FA's Ombud doesn't cost a cent, and that's why you're also getting so many of these claims as well.
Incidentally, it is absolutely unfair that that's the case. But don't damage yourselves by not doing things properly and recording things properly, communicating properly, training properly. Same message.
Thank you. That was really insightful. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and I think we've learned quite a lot today. Andrew, Steve, Michael, and Jame, thank you for your time. Thank you for the presentations. We will make the presentations available if our presenters are happy with that. There will also be a recording available of the webinar, which you will be able to download on the FAnews YouTube page. We will place it there. And then also a reminder, if you want to go and download your CPD certificate on FAnews, it's a self-help easy portal. So just go to FAnews, go to the CPD button, go to forget password, put the email address in that you've registered with, and the rest is fairly simple, but we will also communicate that to you. Enjoy the rest of the session and good luck with your last, Michael, Steve.
Do I get CPD points as well? Because I haven't
Yes,
registered.
you do. Yes, you do. You'll get your
I'll be
CPD
happy.
hours.
Thank you.
So good luck for the last few days to complete your CPD hours. If you use the FAnews system, please don't delay it. Our system is getting exceptionally slow, so try and sort that out as soon as you can. Thank you, Econorisk, once again for sponsoring a very insightful session.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.